So the combine installment here is actually talking about this from the player perspective, and the absolute best term that I've come across for this, and this is just really very prevalent in the combine setting, but it applies again for all athletes, especially athletes at the professional level. But this is the epitome of a pressure cooker. These athletes have this 6 to 8 week period where they have an opportunity to fundamentally change the course of their life, and not just for them, but for their families and for their generations of families to come after, for some athletes at least. This is a highly scrutinized process. They have a very, very small window for error. Everything is being put in front of them as being urgent, being immediate, and then, again, with this potential outcome of tenths of a second being the difference between $7.5 million a year or not getting drafted. And the scope of that is difficult to wrap your head around. Most people, normal people like you and I, aren't really ever going to face situations like that. We also tend to forget that these are still kids, young men, and even with all the NIL shit and with all the, transfer portal stuff, and with how we've, kind of gone about this, we can't lose sight of the fact that these are 20, 21, 22-year-old men. And this is, from a personal level, a very challenging time, and a very immature time, and I think about even beginning to have those kinds of opportunities at that time. There's zero chance I could have handled that. So for these guys, it is something that I think kind of gets lost in the shuffle, or overlooked a little bit, where, we just see them as being these future superstars, these future millionaires, and it's the underwear Olympics, and a lot of this continues to get undermined. But when you see this from a first-person point of view, it's a really grueling process. And the demands are just nonstop all the time. It's coming from the agent, it's coming from coaches, it's coming from scouts, it's coming from us. And the way that these guys are able to handle this is truly impressive. I'll never forget the first day that we were out in Indy last year, having to see what their medical process looks like. And people don't think about this kind of stuff, but there were several guys within our group or other groups that, they were at a hospital, sitting in a cold hospital in a chair for 10, 12, 14 hours, just waiting on these different medical evaluations, where, quite frankly, the goal of the medical evaluation is to find problems, because at the end of the day, the teams are evaluating these athletes as being assets. It is a bottom dollar business. There's no other way to look at it. So these doctors are instructed to really try to probe and find some problems, so that we don't, make a bad investment on a guy who has an undisclosed back injury. The other thing is, none of these athletes are set up for success for the physical part of this. None of them. There's unpredicted meetings. The teams do everything in different ways, so they have to just be reactive to the day. Several times we would plan on having athletes come in. It's 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. They've been up since 5 a.m. We're getting ready to do some treatment and get them off to bed with a decent meal, and then they get a call from a team, and they got to go off, and they got to go do a meeting somewhere. It is a very strenuous process, and I think that what it really kind of underlines for me is that we cannot neglect the humanization of the athlete. And while these situations are what they are, and they're going to be what they're going to be, whether you're involved with this or not, if you're even just appreciating this from a fan point of view, you have to bear in mind that these are not pampered athletes. These are not spoiled dudes. These are not people who are just getting checks handed to them. In fact, in the NFL, you have to fight tooth and nail for every single dollar that you earn. Almost every single athlete's contract is heavily incentivized, and they have to hit certain markers or certain merits to be able to actually collect on the contract that was agreed upon, of which can be ripped to shreds at any point in time by the team. So, case in point here, pressure cooker. If we take that down a couple of notches, and we take that all the way down to a youth soccer player who's 12 years old and just decent, just good at their sport, and they're trying to be a really, really good high school player, good club player. We think about the relativity of stress at that age, a breakup, getting a D on a test, getting made fun of in class. These are, at that point in time, the most impactful stressors that those kids have ever dealt with. So when we have this opportunity as coaches and practitioners to be able to make direct influence or impact on these athletes' lives, it's fundamentally important that we are always considerate of those things and not getting so consumed by what we think is important, or us just putting the best program together, doing the best treatment, things of that nature. Those should be almost secondary thoughts. Understanding and appreciating the relativity of pressure of today's sport, and understanding and appreciating the relativity of stress that these athletes are incurring, is fundamentally a part of what we do.